Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to Black Women Amplified, the podcast. Your host, Monica Wisdom Tyson, brings you downloadable conversations that matter to women around the globe. We discuss all things Black girl magic, amplify our voices, and transform our challenges into triumphs. Monica calls on her league of extraordinary women to push our boundaries, share their expertise, and stories of personal transformation. Welcome your host of Black Women Amplified, Monica Wisdom Tyson.
Hello, family. It's your girl, Monica Wisdom, and I am so excited to be with you today. I swear, every time I get on this microphone, I start singing Beyonce's new country song because it is so catchy. And suddenly I get this country accent. It's like my Missouri country accent comes back. I've worked so hard to sound urban. Like my uncle says, you have to learn to be multi-dialectal, as only a scholar would say. Shout out to my Uncle Harry. Listen, I am so excited about this show today. Do you remember the movie Hidden Figures? Of course you do. Iconic movie, Taraji P. Henson, Octavia Spencer, a movie about Katherine Johnson and who else is it? Janelle Monáe, the women who got America to the moon. The Black women who got America to the moon. Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of hidden figures happening in present day, and we have one of them here with us today. I can't wait to introduce you to her. But before we get into that, thank you for sharing the podcast. It is growing every day. We're getting more and more listeners, and continue to share and take a moment and go to wherever you listen to your podcast and give us a rating. It helps to get it out into the algorithm, as well as share it with your friends, and continue to be my podcast warriors and help this movement and this message grow. Because you know it is all about putting out positive conversations with amazing Black women doing incredible things. Also, don't forget to go to our website, visit it, blackwomenamplified.com. That is our home base on the internet, and join our email list. On our email list is where I share news and information that is not on social media. I give some behind the scenes information, as well as opportunities and, things that I have going on outside of Black Women Amplified. Well, it's all really under one umbrella, and there's many different factors. I digress. I also wanted to talk about, so thank you for that. I also wanted to talk about, before we get into this incredible conversation, I went to see Liv Warfield. If you remember, if you've been around since the beginning, in season 2, I had a conversation with Liv Warfield. If you have not heard it, go back and listen to it. It's an incredible story of manifesting, resilience, sticking to your dreams. She is a dynamic performer. She came to City Winery. It's a new place in St. Louis, so I'm not familiar with it. Apparently it's a chain all across the country, and they bring in a lot of different artists that St. Louis hasn't seen in a long time, and people who need a smaller venue. But I love it because it's an intimate experience, and I prefer intimate experiences over big arenas. Although, if somebody's giving a big arena show, I love that too, because I love productions. Anyway, Liv Warfield, City Winery, St. Louis. I went to see her, and her show was incredible. Incredible. 2 people that I could think of that puts me in the realm of who she is are Tina Turner and Josephine Baker. She had the theatrics of Josephine Baker and the stage presence and the energy of Tina Turner. And it was just beautiful. She did a little bit of everything. Her center is rock soul music. I call her the queen of rock and soul, but she's a rock and roll queen. And she did Bette Davis and just a little bit of everybody and a little bit of everything. And she gets in the audience and does audience participation. So it's not just a show, it's an experience. So head on over to the podcast, look through season 2, find her episode. I should have written down the number of the episode, and listen to her story, because she talks about her remarkable journey from selling CDs out of her car to being on the world stage with none other than Prince. Before I even knew she was with Prince, I saw her on the David Letterman show, and she gave such an incredible performance that I was like, who is this girl? Because, I'm always looking for new music because I rarely listen to the radio. I rarely listen to pop music. I'm always looking and digging for people with interesting sounds who are telling interesting stories. And Liv is one of those people. I listened to her album, The Unexpected, fell in love with it, and I still listen to it, and it's about 10 years old. So anyway, she has a new album out. So if you are on your Spotify, wherever you listen to music, find her, follow her. If she comes to your city, go and see her. I promise you will love her. Yes. So make sure you check out Liv Warfield. High praises, high praises, high praises. Today, oh my goodness, I am so excited to have this conversation. This woman is absolutely incredible, and she is somebody I never heard of before. And when the opportunity to speak to her was brought to me and to read her book, I finished her book in a day. And when I was reading her book, it felt like I was watching a movie of a great adventurer. So let me introduce you today to the incredible Dr. Rae Wynn-Grant. She is a wildlife ecologist and the first Black woman to have her own wildlife show. She has taken over the helm of the iconic show, Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Now, how do you know that name? I remember watching Wild Kingdom as a kid, and it was hosted by Marlon Perkin. Dr. Rae's journey to Wild Kingdom was not an easy one. It was a long, studious journey through Emory University to Yale, where she received her PhD, studying all across the globe, the Great Plains of California to Madagascar, Kenya, and the rainforest. She studied animals in their natural habitat, from black bears to jaguars to lemurs. And in the midst of all of that, she's learning and has learned how to balance marriage and motherhood. Dr. Rae has penned her entire journey in her new memoir, Wildlife: Finding My Purpose in an Untamed World. Dr. Rae's memoir reads like an epic expedition across life. She sat down with us to give an in-depth conversation about her life, her journey, and how she has carved a niche out into a world that doesn't look like her. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Black Women Amplified podcast, the incomparable Dr. Rae Wynn-Grant. Hello, Dr. Rae. How are you? Do you mind me calling you Dr. Rae?
Not at all. Even a little bit. Hi.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm really happy to be talking to you. I'm just nice and warmed up for our conversation. I'm doing great.
I am so happy for you to be joining the Black Women Amplified podcast. And for this moment, you're like a pioneer in your field, especially for Black women. And I never thought I would be talking to a wildlife ecologist. And
Well,
a
I have to
beautiful
say
one at that.
there aren't many of us who are both Black women and wildlife ecologists, but we're out there. We're out here. Like, there's some.
There are
And thank you
some.
for saying I'm beautiful. That's really kind of you. Thanks.
I mean, glamour, science, sexy moments. What more can a person ask for?
I've got it all. I bring it all.
I'm waiting on the movie.
Oh,
Your life
thank
is
you.
so fascinating. I had to continue to remind myself that this was a memoir. Growing up in California, did you imagine traveling the world?
I did. Yeah, I really did. Meaning that I wanted to very badly and I would daydream about it, but I didn't necessarily know that, or I didn't necessarily believe that it would be possible. So if that makes any sense, like I knew what I wanted to do, just kind of like someone who might dream like, oh, I want to be the first person on Mars, but you don't necessarily believe that it's possible. And that was me for a long time. And it was because when I was a kid, I would watch nature shows on TV. Out of all the things to watch, I mean, my parents didn't allow my brother and I to watch much TV, but there was more than nature shows that we were allowed to watch. But for whatever reason, the shows that had these like British or Australian, like middle-aged white guys, like walking through the jungle and seeing tigers or primates or on the oceans with whales. I mean, that's what I loved. And I thought I want to be just like them. Like I didn't know, kind of like how you just said, I never thought I'd talk to a wildlife ecologist. I didn't even know wildlife ecologists existed. I didn't know anyone other than these nature show hosts who spent time with wild animals, right? Like it's not like there was anyone in my family or my community or my school or my consciousness on or on TV that spent time with wild animals other than nature show hosts. So I thought, well, that must be the career that you have if you want to like help protect animals. And so from an early age, I said, well, I want to be a nature show host when I grow up. I want to be in the jungle and I want to see jaguars and tigers and learn about them and help protect them. And that's what nature show hosts do. So yes, so to answer your question, I dreamed of traveling the world for that reason as a kid.
I remember I'm older than you, but I remember getting National Geographics and watching Wild Kingdom with Marlon Perkins. And being a St. Louis girl, of course, we knew
Yes.
Marlon Perkins.
Oh
And
yeah, he
so,
was so big in St. Louis and he made a lot of contributions to the zoo.
yes. And I was same with you. I loved those shows. Anything with animals, I was like, oh my God, I want to see all of the things. And luckily we had the zoo, so I did get to see a lot of the animals. But taking it to the next level, you really went there. And you're relatively a young woman who's lived a really big life. Why did you feel right now was the time to write a memoir when you're still evolving in your career?
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I'm 38 and I'll be 39 this year. So I don't feel old, but it's one of those things where you kind of start to realize like, oh, like, oh, I guess I'm middle-aged and that's fine. But let's see, how would I say it? I didn't ever think I'd write a book like this. And writing this memoir was not my idea. I definitely thought not too long ago, like, oh, I'll probably write a book. I'll probably write a science book or a book about bears and about animals. But I didn't necessarily think I would write the story of my life. And I honestly was just like living my life, minding my own business in 2019. And some literary agents reached out to me, like on the internet, and said, hey, you have a website. And on your website, you have this one short story, which is true. I had always aspired to make a blog, and I
Mhm.
never made a blog. But instead, I had like one little page on my website that had a story. And it was a story not about wild animals, but about this like special moment I had with a community member in southern Kenya. And this literary agent said, like, do you have more of these stories? Because it seems like you're a pretty unique person and you might have these really special stories that people want to read. And I thought to myself, like, well, yeah, I have a lot of these stories. I'm so glad you're interested. I'm happy to tell them, but I never thought like of writing a memoir. I thought memoirs are for old people who are like
Right.
legends, like Abraham Lincoln writes a memoir. Like they're for people who are at the end of their life or people who are so well known, right? Like Michelle Obama, right? Like so well known that you're just dying, the whole world is dying to know every single moment of their life. So I had a lot of imposter syndrome as my agents kept suggesting to me, like, no, I really think you could really have an impact. And honestly, Monica, it took years. I mean, even pulling my book proposal together took years because I worked slowly on it. I didn't really believe that it would be what it ended up being. And again, I was stuck on this thing where I was like, I'm not old enough to write a memoir. But ultimately, I kind of realized that being in my 30s and like my mid to late 30s, that although I'm still doing plenty of wildlife adventures around the world, probably my craziest moments are behind me. And it would be useful to kind of capture them now. I realize like I may, but I probably won't like live in a tent in the middle of the East African bush for 4 months with a Maasai tribe. I would be really surprised if that happens again. I really doubt that I will spend 8 months in the mountains of Western Nevada, like studying bears the way that I have in my 20s. And the stories that came out of that were just so rich and pivotal that I ended up kind of agreeing with my agents and realizing, you know what, now's a good time. And maybe it means that maybe it means that there'll be two memoirs at some point in my life, right? Like the first half of my life and the second half.
Well, Maya Angelou did write three.
There you
So
go. Yeah, maybe she's my motto. My mom, yeah.
she wrote her first memoir in the middle of life instead of the end of her life. So you're following in her footsteps. Now,
Mm-hmm.
long before you traveled the world, your family, you're a California native. I rarely meet a California native. But you all
Yeah.
moved from California to Ohio and then to the South. We migrated from the South. Why was it important for your family to go to the South?
Let's take a quick break.
Hello, everyone. Monica Wisdom here. I am the host and the producer of the Black Women Amplified podcast. But what you might not know is that I'm also a consultant for women entrepreneurs. I help women entrepreneurs develop their ideas, their brand, and their overall business strategy. Are you developing a groundbreaking idea or have a wealth of knowledge that could impact the world but unsure where to go next? Business is good, but you're ready for it to be great. With countless ideas racing through your mind, it's challenging to figure out what's next. I understand. You have excelled with top companies, but entrepreneurship feels like a new language. The truth is, you can do this. You've achieved great success for others, and now it's time to achieve it for yourself. At Monica Wisdom Consulting, we focus on your vision and crafting a clear, concise, strategic plan. Your dreams are within reach. You simply need a powerful roadmap to get you there. Are you ready to take the next step? Book a call and let's discuss your vision and future. You can reach me at www.monicawisdomhq.com.
Yeah, it's interesting because I detail this in my book and I really tried to I tried to write every chapter as if I was like in it. So without the kind of wisdom that I have 3 decades later. But essentially, California is wonderful. It's home. My father's parents are all from there. But my dad, growing up, my dad was a professor. He's an architect and he was a professor of architecture. And for years, he was a young professor, right? When I was a kid, he was in his 30s and he was just getting his footing as a professor. My dad doesn't have a PhD, so almost every professor under the sun does, but he has a master's degree and kind of started teaching in academia right away. And he was on a career journey, something that I respect a lot these days, but I didn't really have a lot of respect for as a kid. I complained when we had to move out of California. But he was on a career journey. He really wanted to reach some stability. And at the same time, he'd been teaching at predominantly white institutions for many, many years. And he really wanted a change. He really wanted to experience something different. And he wanted to experience teaching at an HBCU, both for himself, both for the way the experience would be for him, and also as service to the community. And, HBCUs are in the South. So we moved from California to Norfolk, Virginia, and my dad became city in their architecture department. And it was a really great move for him. So I definitely remember being unhappy about how to move and not really enjoying Norfolk very much at all most of the time. But my dad was happy. My dad really was happy. It was a really great career move for him. And I have to say that it also benefited me and my brother growing up because we were able to spend a lot of time at an HBCU, right? Without being college students, being 12 and 13 and all the way to 18, visiting my dad's office was on the campus of an HBCU where everybody was young and Black and smart and working hard and scholarly. And there's so much, so much benefit to that.
That's one thing I loved about your book is you told that story that's rarely told. because there are a lot of people, like your family wasn't wealthy, but they were wealthy in experiences and opportunities because of institutions like universities. And there were kids who were raised around that we rarely hear their stories. And so you sharing that story, you didn't have Oprah's story or Viola Davis's story. You have your story. And it's an important part of our history that we know about these kids that grew up in academia because we're a little different. We
Agreed.
know opera and ballet and all these cultural experiences that our generations, our peers would say, you're acting like a white kid. But these
hmm
are just the environments that we're raised in. You knew about James Baldwin as a kid. It
It's true.
wasn't,
And in particular, I knew about architecture,
yes.
right? Like I knew the names of kind of renowned architects as a kid. I knew who Frank Lloyd Wright was. Like if you don't know architecture, you will have never heard of Frank Lloyd Wright, but he was like one of America's most notable architects of all time, long, long gone. But that is like this kind of particular academic kid experience where you like kind of have a sense of kind of the current scholarship, even as a young person. To your point, we didn't have the way I say it is that we didn't have enough money growing up. That was what I was aware of, right? We had enough money for the basics. So I was not poor. I did not grow up poor, but we didn't have enough money to own a home most of the time and to take vacations or anything like that. But we took trips a lot because my dad had a lot of conferences. And when he had conferences, that meant there was like a hotel room that the university was paying for. And so we would drive around the country and go to my dad's conferences. And it was a blast for me and my little brother because most of the conference hotels are big and have swimming pools. And so like that was kind of my family's version of summer vacation was going to whatever academic conference my dad went to and all sharing a hotel room. And listen, the memories I have, and I really mean like distinct memories of like the continental breakfast at like the Embassy Suites or the DoubleTree. Like I remember my brother and I thought that nothing got better than like a free hotel continental breakfast buffet. Like that was like the peak. And it's just funny to look back and think like, wow, yeah, like all of that was free. We were just tagging on to my dad's conferences. My mom was working real hard doing childcare while my dad worked. So that was, that's kind of a peek into my academic adjacent life.
Yes. And then you went on to have your own academic life and
hmm
went on to Emory University. Wow. That seemed to be a game changer for you. What did Emory bring to your life?
Yeah, Emory was a game changer for me. And in my book, I talk a lot. I mean, I really do write a lot about the negative experiences I had in high school. And I went to public schools and like sometimes most of the time not like the highest performing public schools. And I really like for the most part didn't enjoy my experience.
Mhm.
And I remember going to Emory. I mean, getting in was a really big deal for me. It was a pretty high ranking school at the time that I was going there, and my grades were okay. Like a lot of my grades were pretty good, but some of my grades were really not good. When I was applying to college, I had like a D and some C's on my transcript.
Oh, wow.
So I was surprised that I got into Emory, and I remember learning that Emory was an affirmative action university, like they made that kind of loud and clear.
Mm.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, I bet I got in because of affirmative action. And from the outset, thinking, like, wow, thank God for affirmative action. Like, I'm going to nail it. I'm going to absolutely kill it. I'm going to do such a good job at this school. And I'm so grateful that affirmative action is in place so that people like me can have this experience. And there's no way of knowing if that's why I got in. I don't know, but I think so. Honestly, like as someone who's like still in academia and kind of knows how admissions works, like
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's why. And I'm a strong proponent of affirmative action. But anyway, it was a game changer for me because I realized that the resources were vastly different. And when I was interacting with teachers and professors who were well-resourced, paid a living wage, like had time for their students, that the student experience was excellent compared to where I'd come from, where probably, I mean, I'd always been so angry with my teachers that I'd never necessarily given them the grace of like thinking about what their lives are like, but they were probably living at the poverty level, just trying to make it. They certainly didn't have time and patience to like go the extra mile for students. And then some of them were super problematic, like racist white people.
That part.
Yeah, that part. But Emory was a place that I took very seriously. So I really wasn't the college student who was wild parties, who like found that freedom and kind of went crazy. I was a college student who realized like I my parents are paying money for this and they do not have very much money. My dad, I took out student loans for college and my dad took out student loans for me for college. It's like debt all around. And I remember thinking like, I have to do so well. I have to take this so seriously because my parents are risking a lot. That's how it felt, at least, for me to be here. And the good news is that, like, although I put all this pressure on myself, I also really liked it. I had a great experience at Emory. It was the right place for me.
But that's a lot of pressure to carry that other children don't have to carry. They can just go have that college experience. How are you able to handle those pressures, not just about your grades, but just making sure that you didn't disappoint your family?
I have to say, I have so much, I have so much reflection now that I'm looking back at this period because, what is surfacing for me and continues to is that like my parents did not put pressure on me. They really didn't. Like I made this up. Now, I'm not trying to say my parents were like, do whatever you want. Like, who cares about money? Like that wasn't it. I mean, my parents were very stern, very strict, like very clear that this was a big sacrifice, but they were doing it because they believed in my potential to really shine. But there were never, ultimatums, or anything like that. So a lot of the pressure that I felt, I think was self-imposed. And, in a lot of ways, I wish I could speak to 18-year-old Ray and say, like, hey, girl, do your best, like, be smart, make good choices, go the extra mile, but don't do it with the stress and the pressure because, your parents don't want that either. And I managed to do okay. There was a lot of very serious students at Emory. So I was in really good company, in the library at 2 a.m., studying really hard for science tests. I was in really good company. But definitely here and there, I had some run-ins with like self-destructive behavior. I didn't put this in my book, but if I'm totally honest, like I had bouts of like disordered eating, at times. There were times that I kind of dealt with my stress by binging and purging. And it didn't last, so it wasn't a forever struggle. I'm very, very happy to say. But, looking back, I can see like, oh, and some of my most intense periods in college where, again, I was stressed beyond belief, I made some really poor choices for my body and my mental health, but not to a point that I experienced, long-term damage and it didn't last. So I ended up being quite resilient. And I don't know if you're getting to this, but I truly believe one of the reasons I was able to be so resilient to the stress that I put myself under is because about halfway through college, I started spending time in nature. So about halfway through college, I decided to do a study abroad program that, I was 20 years old, but it ended up being my first adventure in the wilderness, my first time going on a hike and pitching a tent and going camping and seeing a wild animal. And it really sparked a lifetime, essentially, of healing in nature, growing, personally, mentally, emotionally in nature, and becoming the scientist that I always wanted to be.
But before you got to Kenya, yes, we're getting to that. You had to make a choice in college because you were in a relationship.
Oh,
And the
yes.
choice was, do I stay here or do I go follow my dream? And the reason I feel this question is important because there's so many women that follow their obligation as opposed to their dream. In that moment, why did you choose your dream? And what was your thought process?
Oh, wow. This is a little bit deep for me because,
This is
I
Black
haven't
Women
been,
Amplified.
yeah, and I haven't been asked this question before. Let me say this. I was in a relationship that wasn't good. And it even takes a lot for me to say that right now, because one of the things that I continue to kind of battle with is people pleasing. And the way it shows up for me is like I always want to like make everyone feel good and comfortable and not hurt feelings and, make sure everyone else is feeling good about me. So I'm so tempted to say like, oh, it was good, except, these things. But I'm here to say like it wasn't good. I would not want to see one of my daughters in a relationship like that. I was with a person who was really struggling with himself, a young Black man on campus who was friendly and fun and very, very smart and, had just this great, wonderful soul, which is what I was attracted to. But he was really troubled and did a lot of self-destructive behavior, like really abused substances and, didn't show up for class or anything. So he had a lot of struggles in school. And I loved him very, very much. And there was times, years where we just were not compatible in lifestyle. And I really disapproved of his lifestyle. And that was kind of our main issue. But then as I grew up and kind of became more independent and really started making my desires known, which was to have adventures, to be worldly, to like get out in the world and go away and go abroad, he kind of started becoming much more manipulative. And that's when some ultimatums started creeping in there, like, well, if you leave, then I'm gonna be with someone else, or, I will stop loving you. And these things that like my little baby heart and brain had a hard time handling. And I wish I had been strong enough to say at the time, like, I will not accept this behavior. I want out of this. Leave me alone. This isn't okay. I never want to talk to you again. But I wasn't. And a lot of it was people pleasing. And I bet there's other terms, but I didn't want, I wanted an excuse to get away. At the same time, I really wanted to like go explore wildlife ecology.
I
But I also
mean,
truly, I truly wanted an excuse to get away. I think I have a journal article somewhere where, I say like, I'm not strong enough to get away from him here on campus. I'm not strong enough to like leave him
mhm.
and our relationship. I need like some outside reason that I can use as an excuse. And so I remember when I first brought up the idea of studying abroad, he was super supportive. He was like, great, you totally should study abroad. Like, where do you want to go? Paris, London, like these places that I can fly to and visit you. And I
Hmm.
remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, he's going to come. And I remember thinking, like, oh no, I think somewhere a little more wild. And I remember him saying, like, well, I remember there was someone who studied abroad in a Caribbean island, and it was a little bit harder to get to, but like their relationship was still able to hold up. And I remember like then realizing like I'm gonna have to go somewhere that's off grid. Like because I am not strong enough to just leave, I have to go somewhere where he cannot find me. I literally had those thoughts. And again, this wasn't a dangerous man, but we were codependent and it was toxic. And anyway, I found the perfect program. So I found the study abroad program that was a
In
wildlife management program.
Kenya.
And yeah, and this was like, this was 2005. So this was pre-internet Kenya, like there's internet in some places in Nairobi, but like the country was not wired. This was before smartphones, like choosing this place was choosing to be completely cut off and off the grid, not just from my college boyfriend, but from everyone in the United States. And I was there for it. I was so ready.
How did it feel to be on the continent? You were raised around and in an HBCU. Your parents were very progressive. I didn't realize to the almost the end of the book that Wynn-Grant was your maiden name.
Yeah,
That
I
was
went through that yesterday. I was somewhere yesterday. I was doing an interview actually about my book, and the person was asking me about my husband and saying like, and his last name Grant? And I said, oh no, like I was born with this name. It's Ray Wynn hyphen Grant, and so is my brother. That my parents hyphenated their two names together for us. They were very progressive, very
I was like,
still.
her parents were some black hippies.
They were. They really were.
But
I mean,
it's
talk
just,
about people who should write a book. They
yes.
should.
It just, I was like, my mind just, because you talked about your mother's, she was a poet, and some of
Mhm.
the work that she's done is in the African American Museum. Was
That's
that
right.
correct? And then
Hmm.
your father was an architect and taught architecture and without a PhD. So they had to be some pretty progressive, innovative people. And then they hyphenated their names when it
They're
was
so
the
awesome.
tradition, deep tradition, that the woman takes the man's name. And they were like, no, this is who we are as a family. I
Yeah.
said, oh, I get her now.
Look, you are so nuanced. I really appreciate you reading into this because you're getting it right. You're absolutely getting it right.
I said it all makes sense how she ended up in Kenya and how you were able to, even as a young girl, you might not have been conscious of it. And I'm going too deep into this, but you had autonomy over your choices. You were
Mm.
like, this is what I want to do. And so I'm going for it. I mean, you went from on your grandmother's floor watching Wild Kingdom. Now you have your own show, but we'll get into that later. But it's just like, now
Mm.
when I realized your parents, I was like, oh, I get it now. So, as you were traveling to Kenya, you went on this huge adventure. What did Kenya teach you about America and being an American?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So many things. So, there's some things that like I'm even a little bit ashamed to say I didn't realize even, at 20 years old. But one was that being Black American and being Black African and being Black, particularly like rural East African, are so incredibly different.
Mhm.
So I was really excited to go to the continent of Africa, and of course I knew like, oh, my ancestors, I don't know where they're from, but they're likely from West Africa, right? So I was very aware that I was not going to what was my ancestral home. But I really felt like, well, East Africa is probably, like that's going to offer a connection, like to the motherland and the continent and the people. And, and again, who knows? I've never traced my ancestry, so who knows? And that was true. That proved to be true. From the moment I touched down in Kenya, I felt very much like, wow, Africa is a really special continent. Kenya is a really special place for me to be. This beautiful, abundant, healthy, thriving nation full of gorgeous Black folks whose ancestors have been there for millennia. Like, this is special. I really chose the right place to go. And, and, little millennial me coming from Atlanta,
Right.
and before that, like Virginia, and before that, California, I definitely wasn't prepared for how many misunderstandings and cross-cultural misunderstandings I would have and how my privilege would show up, right? Like I had never really felt racially, ethnically privileged before, right? As like a young Black woman in America, privileged what wasn't a feeling that I often got. And in some ways, like I was kind of smacked in the face with realization by spending time, especially again, I wasn't like in cosmopolitan, like big city Kenya. I was in like rural bush Kenya with a lot of amazing people who chose to live these traditional tribal lifestyles. And so privilege showed up a lot, the privilege that I had as an American, in a lot of ways I realized like, oh, I am, this is the wrong way to say it. This is a sloppy way to say it. But in a lot of ways, I kind of realized like, oh, I'm more American than I am African. Right. And I don't necessarily believe that, but I'm again bringing myself back to that state of mind that I had as I was figuring it out as a young person, and realizing like, God, I am so different from so many of these people. And of course, I love them. I adore them. I'm interested in them. I want to learn from them. But here I was thinking that Blackness in and of itself would make us the same. And, and we're different. And I also, came to a lot of realizations. You're kind of teeing me up for this about America, about being Black in America versus being Black in a Black country. And Kenya has a very violent, vicious history of white colonization that really ripped it apart and caused a lot of trauma for Kenyans. But that wasn't necessarily like at the forefront of my little experience that I had there. Whereas, for example, in the first month that I was in Kenya, unbeknownst to me and my classmates in this study abroad program, Hurricane Katrina was happening in the United States. So we had no idea because, again, we were totally cut off. But about a month later, a month after the hurricane, we found out that, 1,000 people had died. And there was a pretty glaring racial disparity in terms of who was evacuated and who was resourced and who was left to die and who did die and, whose homes were destroyed and who was displaced. Like getting that news while kind of thriving in this East African community was really challenging for me to kind of make sense of. That like my country didn't just have a history of failing Black folks, like it had a present, like a to the day, present harm, racially based harm. And it wasn't just, me digesting that information, but also because I developed friendships, with the Maasai community, because I was the first Black American that had ever traveled to that community before. My role, my kind of unofficial role in that community, even though I was young, was to like explain Black life in America, to my new friends. And I had, for, that first month, I had made the mistake of saying like, we have this crazy history. Let me tell you about slavery and all these things that happened in the past. But it's all over now. It's totally done. And Black people are free and we have equal rights. And there is racism, but it's not very violent most of the time. And like, we're all doing pretty well. And then bam, a month later being like, and the president like doesn't care about us and let the Black community drown. But what that moment in Kenya really solidified for me that I'm so grateful for is that my science and my journey as a scientist and the way I viewed science and wildlife conservation and all of that would never be separate from social justice for me. I had this realization that my identity as a Black American woman will always be a part of the places I go and the things I do. It's never going to be like, oh, Hurricane Katrina happened. Oh, well, let me study this zebra. No, it's always going to be coupled together. It's never going to be, like this wild animal is more important than what's going on at home. And that was a really important lesson for me because I realized that that's not what I was being taught in school. That wasn't the example I had of like, the forefathers of conservation. They weren't out here checking for, communities of color. And yet that would be how my experience was going to go. And I'm glad that I learned that early on.
Yes, because there were so many other points where you were, it hit you when Ferguson happened and when George Floyd happened, and you came to the realization that there are more protections for these bears and these animals than there are for the people. And it had to be it was a very powerful moment in your book when not that you didn't have that realization before, but when you expressed it in the book. And it just showed how you knew in that moment, like you just talked about, that this was your work. It was married to social justice. And I just think that's absolutely beautiful. I mean, I think your book should be required reading for every freshman in America. Because it tells so many stories of us that we don't hear and we don't see. And when you came back from Kenya, you finished your studies at Emory, and then you went on to, go to some prestigious institutions, Yale and Columbia. And there was a woman in your book that you talked about that helped you with your PhD.
Yeah.
Can you talk about her a little bit?
Yes, I can. I don't know if I can talk about her without like getting emotional, but I will try.
Just let me say this because it illustrates how we have to help each other to the next level. And I
Mhm.
think that this was such a beautiful example of what it means to pull somebody up with you.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
it was her last moment of being able to do that before she went on to her next
Mhm.
journey.
Mhm.
And I just think it was beautiful. And I just want I want people to read the story for themselves, but
Yeah.
just a little bit.
Yeah, I was finishing a master's degree at Yale University, which was a really fun place for me to learn. I had such a great time there that I thought to myself, well, let me do a PhD too, because my master's degree is so fun. I bet PhDs are fun also. Little did I know.
Mm.
And I was, I met different professors in real life, and I met this professor named Dr. Eleanor Sterling, and she was at Columbia University. And when I met her because I met her in person. I was able to say, hey, this is me and this is what I'm interested in. And she encouraged me to apply to work with her at Columbia. And I also applied to several other PhD programs. And I got rejected from all of them. Every single PhD program I applied to, I got rejected from. It was really mortifying, especially because like I thought I was doing pretty well. I thought I was a really good, strong candidate at that point. And long story short, I was kind of accepting these rejections and trying to figure out what to do next. And I was at a conference and I ran into Eleanor, and I was trying to avoid her because I was mortified that she rejected me. And she found me at some point and said, hey, I remember you, and I know that you applied to Columbia to work with me, and I know that you didn't get in. She said, I want you to know it wasn't because I don't want to work with you. It was because your GRE scores for math were lower than what Columbia considers their threshold score. And so they can't accept candidates like this. But she said, I've been thinking about you ever since, and I see you at this conference and I see your presentation. And I really would like to find a way for us to work together. And so she said, I can't make any promises. It's kind of out of my hands, but let me see what I can do. And she went back to the department at Columbia, and I don't know what she did. I don't know if she begged. I don't know if she made some kind of compromise with them. I don't know. But I got accepted into Columbia and I had full funding for a PhD. And what I did know was that Eleanor Sterling had a track record of being the advisor for the Black students in that program, of which there were few, but every year there was like one, and she was their advisor. And she was going to be done. I learned later on that I would be her last PhD student, and that was part of like the promise that she made to the university, was that she would stop admitting these like, you know, students that had potential but hadn't yet proved, that they were up to par.
Mhm.
And she whipped me into shape, and she communicated with me about every little thing. And she told me when I was doing well and when I wasn't doing well. And she helped me when things were going on in my personal life. And she mothered me in a lot of ways. I was someone who had a wonderful, close relationship with my mom, and yet, like, I still experience wonderful mothering from Eleanor. And she taught me so much about conservation and communities and people and kind of a systems level thinking. And she supported for me and she fought for me. And again, not just me. Like, she was committed to her students. But because I was her last student, and because I was probably like her most rebellious student in terms of like not necessarily wanting to stay in academia and really just wanting to be a TV show host. Like she really had to do a lot of fighting for me in, this bureaucratic academic space. And she always did. And she would tell me when it was the right thing to do, what she felt it was the right thing to do. She'd tell me when it bothered her. She'd tell me when she was annoyed by it. She'd tell me when she was doing it because she was committed to me, not because she thought I was making the right choices. I mean, she was just honest and thorough, but loyal, loyal.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it through my PhD, like with that program turned me into a scientist and helped me find myself and really helped me like secure a wonderful professional positioning after. And she remained like a mentor to me, for many years after that. And our relationship actually grew and blossomed tremendously after the PhD program because she was kind of no longer my boss. And anyway, one of the reasons that I wrote so much about her and I dedicated my book to her and I'm speaking about her like this is because she died last year and she died really suddenly from an illness that just like from cancer that came on quickly and spread really rapidly. And oh my gosh, I miss her a whole lot. And I miss her every day. And I am often struck with how much she shaped me and how well she prepared me and how she really was always vocal about leaning into potential. She said that she believed in potential so much. She was not the kind of person who said, you have to have proof that you're great. She really believed that the best people to invest time and energy in were the people who had the potential to be great. And I didn't know she was going to die. It's not like I, wrote this book because, or like kind of accomplished all these things because I felt like I owed her anything. I feel like I and so many of the people who were mentored by her are proof that she was right, that investing in some people who often don't fit the mold of what's mainstream or what's normal or what's socially acceptable, right? Like people with low math GRE scores who want to be scientists who use high level math every day, that can be the right thing. And again, like she was like a white woman from like a rural town in America. Like she wasn't like me in most ways, but she changed my life for the better. And I will never forget her, and I will never forget what she taught me.
And you proved her right and you continue her legacy. And I know that you're feeding that into other people. As a part of what you're doing, I'm telling you that I have 10,000 questions, but I know that we are limited on time.
I know,
I
our
want to
time's
ask
up.
about I want to ask about Misty Copeland and Prince and the
Oh,
kiss and all the
oh,
sexy
yeah.
moments. And this
Mhm.
book was so fun to read. But I tell you what, you are one mad manifester. From
Oh,
watching a
God.
show on television, and now you have your own show.
Yeah.
You've had shows, but this is like the big one.
No, I mean, I had appeared on shows in the
Okay.
past, but this is the first time that I have a show. I am co-hosting Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, the America's first nature show. I am
Yes.
the first Black woman with a network wildlife show in the history of
All the
the
shows.
yeah, and
All the sh-
and again, like it's one of those interesting things where like sometimes I struggle to kind of articulate it because what I want to say is like I didn't achieve this. Like I didn't create the show. You know what I mean? Like I didn't build this show and put me on it. Like I was asked to co-host the show. So I did a lot to manifest it, to position myself, to be ready, to be skilled and qualified and good, and I had so much help along the way. And I had doors, people who were willing to open doors. Like there was a lot of doors I couldn't open myself. I had been trying to have a nature show for like 10 years. Like Wild Kingdom wasn't the first show I tried to, pitch myself to host. Like I had gotten so much rejection. There were doors slammed in my face. I didn't open the Wild Kingdom door myself. Someone else opened it. And, and that teaches me a lot too, because throughout my life and in my book, you'll see this theme of like me, like doing it myself. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to go the farthest and do the most and me. Like I'm doing it on my own by myself. And probably the biggest, most important successes I've had have been because someone helped me. And that's so important. And I've learned like that there's no like shame in that. It doesn't make it less of a cool accomplishment if like someone opened the door for you or helped you or invited you in. It's great. And then, almost to your point, that's what we get to do for other people.
I noticed that there was a shift in you in the book when you were offered a position by the Biden administration. And you again chose yourself, but your dream was different. Your dream was your family. And to walk on your own because you left an institution or were leaving an institution. And I feel that it's what opened the door for this opportunity. Because at that time, you were like, what do I want to do? And how do I want to live my life? And you went back to your original dream, which was to have your own show.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, you can imagine it was a really tough moment I was being offered a life-changing,
And a good
career
check.
opportunity. Yeah, and a good check. And like, I mean, a big honor, right? Like a huge honor for someone like me. But it came with limitations, right? And it also came with saying goodbye to science. So that was what kind of rose to the top for me, was that working in the White House or with the Biden administration was going to mean like doing policy, doing environmental policy, which is like obviously what science lends itself towards. But it would mean like putting down the being outside and collecting data and the asking questions and raising hypotheses and finding answers. And it would put down any hope of like having a podcast, doing social media, eventually hosting a show. And I kind of couldn't believe it because I wasn't hosting a show at the time. I didn't have a podcast at the time. Like I wasn't actually doing those things, but I felt like I was so close. And lo and behold, I was. But I was able to, I found it within me to say no, thank you, and to kind of keep betting on myself. I will also add that the day I was supposed to give them my response about the Biden job was also January 6th, 2021. And that was when Capitol riots took over. So all literally on the day that I needed to like let them know, I was like,
I'm good.
seem like a safe choice for me. So
God said, you can't make the decision. I'll make it for you.
That was like God, saying like, girl, no, maybe not.
This has been a beautiful conversation. There were points in the book, and I'm just going to say this and then I'll leave it alone. But I went through so many emotions in this book. I laughed, I cried with you. And there was at the end of the book where you're leaving an institution, you wrote this journal entry, and I just started cheering. I was like, yes. I'm not going to say all the things I said out loud, but there were moments in the book, and it is so well written that like when you get to the end of one chapter, there was like a cliffhanger and you had to go to the next one because there's so much adventure in this book. And I said to you, this is her real life? I just kept asking myself this question. I'm like, I feel like I'm reading a movie script. But let me say this, is one Black woman to another. I am so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
For saying yes to your life, saying yes to the opportunities. Even when you were in the middle of, should I do it or should I not do it, you did it. And the other piece that I want to say is I loved how through when you were on your travels, even though you had your own beliefs and own opinions of things, you really got engaged with the community that you were in. The story of the giraffe, I was like, wow, that had to be a deep moment to step into that culture and say, oh, but I'll let people read that story. I'm not going to get into it.
I was going to say the giraffe story is one of my favorites to tell because it is really incredible.
Yes, the giraffe story was everything because I was like, she just, at that moment, she just like, boop, this is where I am, and this is what they do, and this is what I'm going to do. You moved yourself out of the way and immersed yourself into that moment. And I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And then you got to see what the circle of life in a whole new way. But I could go on with you forever.
I would love to. We'll have to do this again.
I'm like, I'm going through questions. I'm like, I don't have time. But I just want to thank you, one, for writing this book and saying yes to the literary agent. And thank you for coming on the Black Women Amplified podcast. How can people find out about you? Of course, I'm going to put everything on the Black Women Amplified website. But how do people find you on social media? And most importantly, how can they see your new television show?
Oh, yay. I'm happy to talk about all these things. I love social media. I'm most active on Instagram, but all of my social handles are the same. It's at Ray Wynn-Grant. So that's RaeWynnGrant. I also have a website, raywyngrant.com, where you can keep up with a lot of stuff. And my show, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, is on every Saturday morning on NBC. So check your local listings for what time, depending on where you are. But it is also streaming on Peacock if you stream, or you can watch it on NBC.com anytime you want. So there's a lot of ways. I'm proud to say there's a lot of ways. And then I have my book, Wild Life, coming out April 2nd.
Yay! Thank you. I can't wait to read the book because I've read the book. Thank you to your people. And I hope that everybody picks up a copy, and pick up a copy for you and for a young woman in your life. Because when I tell you that this is a story that we don't hear, this is a story that we need to hear and that we need to embrace, because she is one of our pioneers and she does not need to be a hidden figure. The whole world needs to know about her. So thank you again, Dr. Ray, for joining the Black Women Amplified podcast. I cannot wait to talk to you again and again and again and again. Have an amazing day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Black Women Amplified. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe and log on to blackwomenamplified.com for more information. Keep shining.